This week, I'm finally deciding on the color palette for my OC Seraphim, who belongs in the universe of my graphic novel that I'm working on. Hi, hey, hello. If you're new here, my name is Rain. If you're not new here, welcome back. I really appreciate you stopping on by to my little corner of the internet. This video is mostly just the real-time process of coloring her in, so it's going to be super cozy. So if you want to grab snacks, draw alongside me, go for it. It's going to be just a casual 40 to 50 minutes together. So let's start talking color palette, character design, all of those fun decisions. Oh, and if you have time to watch to the end to see the final product, I would really appreciate it because I want to put up a poll after this video comparing the warm and the cool tone scans of it and the preferences overall. So now let's get into it. Quick little editing Rain here. I just wanted to pop in and say that this section of the video is called Seraphim's Purpose in the time cards. I will be discussing some of the base color palette decisions I made previously to this video, like I knew I wanted them that way. Then I will discuss my graphic novel and Loki, my main character, and then how Seraphim ties into that and how her color palette benefits that component of the narrative. If you would like to learn more about Seraphim as an actual kind of baseline character, that'll be in the next section, so check the time card for that. But we're going to go into why she exists in the graphic novel first to then explain her personality. So I just wanted to pop in and explain that because it's kind of like a long section and I'm going to kind of derail onto Loki for a second to then explain why she's important. Okay, back to the videos. I think that the marker gods or demons possessed me this week. I have never locked in and pulled off a color palette so perfectly first try while working with Ohuhu markers ever before. I usually have to fumble and sort through at least 5 different shades of purple before I find my primary trio. I don't know what possessed me. I was so lucky this week. I don't even have words for it, but I have almost the perfect color palette from the get-go. One issue that I need to address in future illustrations is I like to do a lot of undertones of different colors, and I have to figure out the blue and the green that I really like for Seraphim's skin tone. But for this illustration, this is the perfect base in terms of the skin and the hair. So one issue is I do struggle with the shirt color a little bit later. But other than that, I always try to pick 3 skin colors, 3 hair colors, and then kind of 3 base colors. Those base colors for a character are either going to be a shadow color that I want to use consistently throughout the piece, or just blushes and undertones to the skin. The objective with that is to have some consistency that I can use throughout, and to ensure that the blush kind of harmonizes with any other bright reddish or pinkish hues that I want to use throughout the piece. And that is to just limit my color palette personally so that I don't get carried away when making decisions for the initial kind of character design. In the future, when drawing Seraphim, I'm going to be a lot more kooky and playful with my colors, as is kind of my brand and artistic identity, and get a little bit more hyper pop in my creative decisions. But when it comes to deciding the base color palette for a character, their identifying colors, I really want to keep it as simple as possible to ensure that I have a cohesive understanding of how I want them to present in basically anybody else's art style, right? These are the colors I want people to key identify about Seraphim, so that if they wanted to make fan art of Seraphim, these would be the base colors, right? And then the colors that I will in future illustrations and in my graphic novel add on to her are just my art style, my kind of playful identity, the way I render, right? I hope that makes sense. If you haven't seen my art before, it might not. I will try to remember to put something up on screen right about here. and show you some of my more funky colored art and kind of the way that I kind of implement color a bit differently in certain illustrations. So that's on screen if you want to see it. Don't have to look at it. It doesn't really matter for this illustration in particular. But my art style does kind of rely on funky and spontaneous colors added to create a bit more of a visual disco vibe. I don't know how to articulate it. Like, I color the way I color, and I'm not very good at identifying those key components in, like, words, I guess. I forgot to disclaimer for everybody new here. If you hear, like, a weird gurgling / wheeze in the background, my youngest cat has asthma, and she sleeps in my workspace. So if you're hearing her asthma, I try to tune it out as much as possible in the videos. She has her inhaler. She's had her doses for the day. She's just wheezy. It's just how it is. But back to the actual topic. I really wanted Seraphim to have purple hair, and I think I had that decided in the back of my head in my video where I was kind of designing and discussing the initial kind of designing of her a couple of weeks ago. I think I made my video designing my new OC like 2-3 weeks ago. So I think I knew I wanted her to have purple hair and darker skin, like mid-tone skin, when I was designing her. So when it came to actually putting the color to paper, this was a pretty straightforward decision for me, right? I knew I wanted lavender, I wanted something fun, and I knew I wanted a generally darker skin tone to my usual go-to kind of sickly pale, because a lot of my characters are undead or technically still dead, so they're supposed to look like zombie, sickly, afterlife colors, right? Generally, like, it's mostly just for convenience that they look dead, you know, like, just make them basically see-through as is, right? So I wanted her to have a bit of a darker skin tone to complement that nice, soft colored hair. I really like hair and skin tones that are opposites of each other. Like, it's a huge thing for me. It's one of my favorite character design kind of tropes, is like a really pale character with dark hair and then darker characters with bright, soft colored hairs. Like, I love the way it looks aesthetically. It's so fun, and I love the playful kind of color that comes from it. And I don't know why lavender just felt right, but I also use purple as my primary shadow for everything. So it is just easier color palette wise, because I can just use the same purple for the base of her hair, for all of her clothing and kind of general shadowing, which is very nice and very convenient for me because I don't have to think about creating a cohesive shadow. Like, it's already automatically done for me. So that's just kind of a huge bonus that makes my life easier. And a lot of the times when it comes to my, like, affection for purple shadows on super pale characters and characters with dark hair, it's hard to make that purple kind of show through the way that I want it to and really have that pizzazz that I want. So Seraphim, it just looks absolutely perfect. It was just, I don't know how to articulate how excited I am that this just came together so naturally this week. I never have this type of luck with color decisions. I'm so happy. But the soft purple hair, I am trying to, the character's kind of writing herself, right? Like, I talk about it every once in a while, but there comes a point in the character design process where they're solid enough in my mind in their base kind of concept that the rest of their identity and presentation just kind of happens, right? Like, the character knows what it wants to be, who they want to be, and I have to kind of work around it in terms of, like, the visual language, right? So when I'm thinking about Seraphim and her role within the universe of my graphic novel, I have been thinking really hard about how I want her heritage to actually manifest. I know that Seraphim is an orphan to at least a large extent. I know that she didn't have her family growing up and that she has some level of trauma and bad experiences relating to the Christian church, and that being kind of what she was named after originally, right? Now, when it comes to the actual universe that she exists in, there are definitely some solid ways I can incorporate that into the graphic novel and how that actually kind of naturally manifest, but I want to make sure that all of these decisions I'm making serve the narrative that I'm trying to tell. And while Seraphim is kind of a main-ish character, she serves to be a figurehead for Loki that I think I really needed when I was first kind of grappling with and learning to live with post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So for those of you who do not know about the graphic novel that I'm doing for my MFA project, my Masters of Fine Arts, I'm writing a graphic novel / manga thing, right? About Loki post-Ragnarok with no memory of exactly who they are and what they did. Like, they know they're Loki. They know that they were a god. They kind of understand that they have some innate abilities, but they don't know who Loki is or was. And Loki is traveling through the new world post-Ragnarok, trying to figure out who they were, who they are now, and learning to live with the regret, the grief, and the trauma that came from Ragnarok, right? From them making horrible decisions and the consequences of their actions, while also being able to be a better person now and find a new Loki post-Ragnarok. And Loki is neither a sinner or a saint entirely in this story. Loki has done horrible, horrible things, and I'm doing a lot of research to try and figure out exactly what the key points of Loki in terms of myth are and what order they occurred in. But the more I research and the more sources I find, the more I feel like I can't portray Loki as being purely a horrible person prior to Ragnarok. The more I read about how the other gods treated Loki prior to kind of their horrible behavior, the more I feel like Loki, while making horrible decisions, doing horrible things, and being a bad person, likely felt justified in those actions based on what the gods had done first. And I think to an extent, I have space in this illustration, in the story, to discuss trauma before Ragnarok and actually navigate how trauma led to those horrible decisions, and them now choosing to not make the same mistakes and manage their trauma properly post-Ragnarok. I don't know how much that makes sense, so let me utilize an example. Loki traditionally Loki uses he, him pronouns for most myth. I'm choosing to have Loki be gender fluid, so I will use any and all pronouns, kind of depending on the point in the narrative and how they're presenting at the time. But Loki is generally he, him pronouns, and he fathered 3 creatures with a Jotun wife or lover, depending on the myth, who were kind of predetermined by destiny to have large parts to play in Ragnarok, which would be the destruction of all of the worlds and all of the gods. So, Odin, in an attempt to either kind of mitigate Ragnarok or like delay it, it's hard to know why Odin would do this to Loki's children if he wasn't trying to delay Ragnarok, but some sources say Odin never tried to delay Ragnarok. So I'm kind of 50-50 in terms of it. I don't understand why Odin would do this if he was just going to accept Ragnarok coming when Ragnarok was going to come, right? But Loki had 3 kids with this frost giant wife, Jormungandr, who was a sea serpent, or not a sea serpent, a large snake who kept getting bigger, Fenrir, who is a wolf who also just kept getting bigger, and Hel, a half-dead, half-living woman. And so they tossed Jormungandr into the sea in an attempt to drown him, and he became the Midgardian serpent who wraps around the earth. Fenrir was kept on Asgard for a brief period of time, but he ultimately got so big and they got so fearful that he would hurt people and destroy parts of Asgard that they bound him in chains as a challenge. They said, "I don't believe that you're capable of breaking free of these." And Fenrir accepted the challenge and broke free. The gods became even more fearful of him because of that, and asked the dwarves to create unbreakable kind of binding agent, like a unbreakable thing. Like, I don't think they specified that it had to be chains or not. And the dwarves drafted a kind of rope, a kind of like silken, to my understanding, a very silken but inconspicuous rope. And Fenrir was suspicious of this when presented with the challenge to break out of that. So he said, "Hey, I'm only going to do this if one of you will put your hand in my mouth as collateral." And that is how the god Tyr lost his hand, because Fenrir could not break out of this binding. And Fenrir is now basically restrained in bondage until Ragnarok is to commence. Hel, they decided, would be able and was well equipped to handle those who died unhonorable deaths, and so she became the goddess of the afterlife, of not so, valiant war-based deaths, and then the afterlife is now called Helheim because of that. And so I can't find a lot of sources indicating that Loki was doing horrible things prior to his children being taken away from him on the basis that they would participate in Ragnarok, and before they had done anything wrong. I have found a myth about Loki killing somebody's servant for no good reason, other than that he could not be faced with the amount of praise they were receiving. I have yet to figure out exactly if that is pre or post his children being taken away. And so I really think that there's room, depending on how my research goes, to utilize that as an instrument for, because that's a traumatic experience, right? Having your children stripped away from you when they are just kind of little-uns, Jormungandr became massive within the sea, and Fenrir was growing too fast. I'm not sure how old Hel was when she was taken, but effectively, and like in what order they were taken yet, I've been having a hard time discerning that. I think that we just genuinely do not know, because a lot of what Norse mythology is based upon has been lost to time, and I think there is room for interpretation. But I feel like there is room to discuss how you can negatively process trauma in a way that is destructive to yourself and others. And I think that this is making Loki an even better god to have chosen to implement this message, because, I'm not trying to tell a message. I'm trying to tell a story about my own experiences with trauma and put it into a mythological kind of basis where people, one, recognize the story, recognize the character, and are able to kind of follow trauma through the lens of something that they already kind of know. And so I have had a lot of personally destructive behaviors in relation to trauma that I have had to then fix before it got too far. I think that this is making Loki a better character for this narrative because I can then kind of present what Loki did pre-Ragnarok as a trauma response and horrible actions trying to deal with grief and just other things that are particularly difficult surrounding losing your children, even if they weren't technically dead. And then kind of have that be a way for Loki to reflect once he does start to regain his memories post Ragnarok, because Loki doesn't wake up with them. The objective with that is I've lost a lot of my memories in my early childhood to the trauma being severe, and I don't remember large and many years of my life between the ages of 6 and about 14, 15 years old. Most of that is gone now. And I want to be able to approach discussing what it's like to try and remember things and remember the simple aspects of life, but just having nothing there. And so I think that Loki can see that their actions, while he felt justified then and were out of grief and or trauma, I'm yet to figure out how I want to approach that. He can recognize that that was not the correct course of action to take, and while he felt vindicated and justified then, it is a destructive behavior that hurt a lot of people. And I think that this is a good way to continue talking about the complexities of mental health and how trauma kind of manifests, and how, while trauma makes you want to or forces you to act a certain way, or it kind of puts you in situations where it's really hard to conquer those kind of base responses, we have the ability to work on ourselves and try and find healing strategies and kind of self-help strategies to ensure that we are still functional people and good people despite the negative experiences we had, right? And so Seraphim originally is to be the character that I needed and wanted as a child who had nobody but was going through these experiences that ultimately changed who I am forever and have fundamentally altered my ability to function the way that I should have at that age, I guess would be the polite way of saying it without saying too much, right? Seraphim is the character who is there to support Loki in finding himself and to hold him accountable, right? Seraphim, while compassionate, empathetic, and understanding that this is a process that takes time and healing takes time, is also not going to permit Loki to be a bad person and will hold Loki accountable for those behaviors that Seraphim perceives as being destructive to himself or others, right? And Seraphim is going to be that anchor who won't judge him or get rid of him or cast him aside the way others did, and will help Loki to kind of find herself and figure out how to function in spite of everything that happened. Because when I was a child and I went through the things that I did, there was nobody in my life to simply be with me and support me in continuing existing, which it sounds so unnecessary, but to have somebody who simply lets you feel and understands that you're feeling and doesn't try to force you to be better immediately are so important to properly healing. Having somebody who understands that it takes time and is willing to be with you and sit with you while you find yourself again is something that's so undervalued, I guess. And I want Loki to have that because this is just as much a story of PTSD, trauma, grief, as it is me trying to heal myself of those past experiences and tell a story that has a happier ending than where I'm at right now, right? Like, I want Loki to heal better than I have healed so far. And I want to explore what healing can look like, both historically for me, but also what healing can look like in the future. And Seraphim is that anchor. And so when I've been deciding Seraphim's color palettes, I want her to stand as an opposition to Loki in a lot of ways, right? Seraphim is, I wouldn't say flamboyant, but very much wears her heart on her sleeve, vibrant, colorful, has an attitude, like a flashy, sassy attitude. And I want that to show in her presentation. I discussed in my designing her character video that her hair is to an extent sentient. Like, she's very in touch with nature, and her hair kind of exists on its own. Not entirely, but it expresses itself. It kind of tries to tell stories, and it is an extension of her self-expression. It perks up when she's perked up. It kind of flattens like a dog's ears when she's feeling down or not so excited, right? It's supposed to be a part of her in just a way that is beyond what hair is capable of being, right? It moves. It kind of morphs itself to the mood and the situation. And there's something about that that's just so playful and fun. And I think that Seraphim as a character really just lives that up. And so the lavender just feels so right. It's soft and loving and considerate like she is, but it's fun and playful and unnatural in a way that kind of embodies her bubbly attitude, right? And I think that Seraphim chooses to pursue the utmost happiness in life and the utmost joy in every moment because of her own negative experiences, right? Her living without her family and living in the woods and being somewhat raised by nature, it feels very right for her, and I love it a lot. I really, really do. And so when it comes to Seraphim and the actual kind of existence of her, she is to serve a very specific purpose as a character, and she is kind of secondary to Loki's journey because Loki's journey is the primary narrative that I need to convey. I want Seraphim to stand alone as a character in a way where she feels complete and whole, and it just is right. I want her to feel lovable and comforting in a way where people who empathize and relate to Loki can picture their own Seraphim. And Seraphim can feel like a real comfort character for people who need a Seraphim in their life. And I'm hoping that I'm conveying that by giving her a very soft and playful color palette that kind of exhibits that loving but bubbly nature, if that makes sense. I could have made a much more goth version of Seraphim, and I don't think she strays away from the color black, but it doesn't serve the goal of making Seraphim that bubbly comfort character that's easy for people to latch onto as a source of warmth and joy, if that makes sense. Yes, it would look really good, but I need her appearance to convey that emotional kind of draw, and the yellows, the purples, the kind of soft, flushed skin, it just works better than that darker color palette, but it also makes her a stronger opposition to Loki's character design, who is much more pale, dark-haired, sharp eyes, and generally I want him to lean more masculine, but have very feminine components to their design to exhibit that gender fluidity. Definitely a bit more masculine leaning androgyny, probably. I've drafted Loki's face and how I want them to appear. I've been really struggling to capture Loki's like baseline physique that I want to utilize. So that's just kind of, the whole shenanigans. But let's get into a different aspect of Seraphim's character. I mentioned that I anticipate that Seraphim will remain an orphan. That was an idea I had in my original video when initially designing her character. And the more that I explore this idea, the more it makes sense within both the lore of the universe and it suits her as an individual as well. So in all of my research and thinking about the elements that I want to maintain and have be very strong and represented in my my story, right? I really want to maintain a strong tie to the earth, the natural world, and avoiding industrialism. And I think that I'm 50-50 on if I want Ragnarok to be apocalyptic, which sounds weird, but when drafting up the storyboards for the start of the story, I had a modern society being destroyed, and I had it be a little bit more cottagecore fun villages post-Ragnarok, right? And I'm thinking that perhaps I actually want to maintain that idea and have my story be strongly tied to kind of nature and have that be symbolic of personal growth and kind of like your personal identity. So not necessarily like herbalist healing or anything like that. If you've been here a while, you know that I have a huge issue with like naturopathy and stuff like that. So not like that, but just have the kind of forest and the regrowth of the world post Ragnarok be symbolic of Loki growing and kind of flourishing into the best version of themselves that they can be, right? Like purely metaphorical, not at all related to like natural healing. And I think that it makes sense to have Seraphim be the granddaughter of Jord. It's spelled Jord, at least in most of the places I've checked, so I'm not entirely sure how it's pronounced, but everywhere is kind of leaning toward Jorth and Jord. So I'm going to lean towards Jorth and Jord, and have it be like J's or Y's. But the Jorth is the goddess of the earth. And I don't necessarily think that Seraphim's grandmother, Jorth, has survived Ragnarok per se, but I think that Seraphim being a demigod and having strong ties to the natural world, which is where Loki meets Seraphim living in the forest in her cottage that she basically has lived in since she was a youngin', and was mostly raised by the wilderness, growing her own kind of plants and making her own clothes and stuff. I think that it just kind of makes sense with how I already designed her character to have her be demigod adjacent so that she can have kind of an attunement to Loki to an extent and also just have a more fleshed out character where she can have her own kind of process of exploring herself throughout the story. As Loki learns more, Seraphim can also learn more about herself. And I don't know how much Seraphim will actually travel with Loki in terms of Loki trying to uncover their memories. I don't know that they will be tag teamed together the whole time, but I know that Seraphim will always be Loki's first home post Ragnarok, and the first person to give him a second proper chance in being a new person who knows that he is the true original Loki, who is believed to have started and been the primary contributor to Ragnarok. So I want her to have her own kind of independent, strong story. And because this is a Norse mythology-based narrative, it makes sense to tie her to the gods in some capacity. And while I don't think that she's going to go on any sort of like demigod mission where she's like trying to uncover kind of all of the things lost to time and lost to history regarding her grandmother. I think that her kind of discovering that innate understanding of her own kind of natural earth magic will help her better understand how she prospered for so long and understand why the church originally did not agree with Seraphim. Well, Seraphim is, named after something that is strongest to, like, Judaism, Christian, and Islamic religions. I'm not gonna, I think, specify exactly which, like, church or religion she was tied to, and I don't think I'm necessarily going to choose, if I do, a real-life religion. I think it'll be a vague religion, just kind of innate and kind of adjacent, because other people's religions and religion isn't really kind of like part of this narrative, and so I don't want people to focus on that aspect necessarily. I want people to be able to relate to having a bad experience with religion and Seraphim kind of finding what works for her and finding the life and the kind of path that worked for her. But I don't necessarily want other people to feel like their religion is being targeted just because I personally had a bad experience with certain religions, and that's why I'm not religious. I want my graphic novel and my story to be as kind of passive as possible in all aspects. I want people to be able to relate and understand and not really get bogged down by little aspects that make them feel uncomfortable. And I feel like just kind of making a new religion just for this, like, aspect of her character makes sense. It just kind of makes it so that it's completely neutral in that capacity. But it'll probably be generally Christian adjacent, just because that's what seraphs are kind of like from, like based from. They're a celestial heavenly being that is of a higher order. And Seraphim kind of realizing that she is the descendant of a Norse god and kind of being tied to earth magic and natural magic, I feel like it makes sense for her to kind of go a more druidic path, like D&D druid type stuff, like follower of Halsin, please. Praise the Oak Father, that type of stuff. And I just want her to be able to realize and have that process where she's like, I didn't jive with it because I am genetically bound to this goddess who has kind of like granted me a lineage where I am bound to kind of natural magic, and she wants to be very kind of an earth-focused conservationist. I think that if Seraphim is to kind of like part ways with Loki in any capacity after the story and like pursue a particular career field, I think she would become an environmental scientist, and she would focus on conservation methods of like endangered plants. And I think that's very Seraphim coded. And I think she would use her kind of natural goddess earth magic to kind of preserve and try to restore ecological environments that have been targeted and harmed by like human action, or we're struggling to recover even post Ragnarok and stuff like that. Like that's very Seraphim adjacent. And I think to an extent it just helps to kind of tie to the empathy. I feel like we perceive nature and the environment as, well, cruel and unforgiving and harsh and highly dangerous, as seen in Ragnarok. Also a place of kind of like healing and coming back to yourself, and a place for you to be your authentic self because you have no one to kind of place judgment upon you when you're in these natural environments. And so I feel like Seraphim is a really good balance for that, and can kind of, use that kind of earth magic to, support through missions, difficult situations, and help navigate. Because I don't also think Loki would be the most navigationally sound individual now that the world is completely different from the world that they had lived in for hundreds, if not thousands of years prior. I think Seraphim being able to be in touch with nature can help with navigation and kind of exploring and guiding Loki through the brand new world, because nature can like talk to her and her hair is sentiently attached. And I just want sentient plant hair, okay? Like that's it. I don't yes, I'm gonna make it fit in the lore, but I really just want sentient fun plant hair. Like, I can't really, like, defend myself on that front. I just really want it, and it'll make me really happy, and so, I'm going with it, and no one can stop me, okay? But also because I want to kind of have, Sadir and kind of Norse magic. I was looking into the other two. I'm spacing on their names right now because I don't have my notes for my graphic novel in front of me. But the runic magic didn't really feel right because I don't really want to risk not knowing the runes, and I was having a really hard time finding cohesive research on it. And then I'm totally blanking on the other one, but it also felt not quite right for the type of magic I want Seraphim to have. And so Seraphim having a similar magic to Loki also kind of allows for them to have that extra point to bond upon. And I think that that'll also be highly beneficial for forging their relationship. And it just kind of feels right. So when it comes to the color palette, just for some final like notes, I tried to consistently add the red from her cheeks and her tie throughout the rest of the piece, adding hues of it to kind of deepen and create more intricacies to the shirt and making that color palette a little bit more interesting. I also brought that red to the jam earrings that I assume she made herself. And it also just kind of tied with the fact that I used a red colored pencil for the base sketch. So all of it has that kind of red undertone throughout the pieces. Then I went with the yellow because obviously it's very sunshiny and warm, but I tried to add that yellow throughout the skin a little bit more to give that vibrancy and that warmth and that glow to Seraphim's skin, and I think it worked really well. I went with gray eyes to match the gray skirt because I really didn't want to incorporate another kind of bold color because the purple and yellow are complementary to each other, and the red kind of matches the flush of everything and the tie, and I'll probably do red bows every once in a while just for fun, but I didn't want to add kind of a fourth strong color. You know, the red is very passive but intense, and so I don't want anything else kind of challenging that. And gray is nice, it's neutral. I can put, as you see, the yellow colored pencil over it to create those yellowy and red hues here and there. And so it can reflect the light and kind of change tones a little bit. You know, I can add the little bit of pizzazz without it being this overwhelming additional kind of punchy color to really kind of, you know, I guess hit. You know, it feels very passive, and then I can match that to gray eyes, which I feel like is pretty solid. I think if I wanted to tie her into nature a little bit more, I could replace the red with green, but Loki's predominant colors are going to be a green, black, and then I kind of want to do a vibrant pink color here and there. So I don't really want them to be too similar in color scheme because it's really hard. It's going to be really hard to draw the characters looking very consistent every single time. So I really want to have them also have very strong, independent, different color palettes so that I can draw them far away without a lot of detail, but have those colors tell readers, like, oh, that's Seraphim, that's Loki, right? Like, oh, that's Seraphim over there in the crowd, if it's, like, a shot like that, you know? Like, stand out, that's them, that's their color palette, that's who they are, you know? It's their signature. So it's also for that purpose that I'm trying to, like, maintain a pretty, like, distinct difference in their color palettes. So I'm going to add some fun colors to Loki as well, other than the, like, vibrant pink probably, because green is very passive, natural, and neutral. You know, it's not really a color that, like, punches and stands out the way the purple and yellow do. So I'll probably have something other than just that vibrant pink that I want to add, maybe a cyan. But other than that, like, he's going to be a very kind of toned down color palette as well. And so Seraphim remaining punchy but not, like, clowny is kind of important for me because I really think that it helps to further distinguish kind of them as separate entities, but opposites that are very complementary to each other as well. So I hope that that was kind of an interesting discussion about color palettes and how they're incorporating into my narrative and how I kind of came to the decisions I did when it regards Seraphim and her color palettes, at least. Ultimately, since you're here, it means you made it to the end of the video, so you listened to me talk about my OC lore for almost 50 minutes without tuning out. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope you like Seraphim as a character. If you have any thoughts or opinions on her that you would like to share with me, feel free to let me know in the comments below. If you worked on an OC throughout this, tell me about them. I'd love to hear it. And if you share your stuff on social media anywhere, feel free to tag me in it, or drop your user down below so I can go support you the way you just supported me. Other than that, like if you like, dislike if you dislike, subscribe if you would like to see more of my content. I do kind of casual, chill stuff like this every Saturday. And if you know any Norse history buffs who have recommendations for researching for my graphic novel that are not at all Marvel Cinematic Universe adjacent, anything other than that, and any other modern day narratives including Loki, I would love to hear about them and see how other people interpret the Norse kind of myth. And yeah, so I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, wherever you are. And with all of this being said, bye-bye!